We have been going through Luke in order. And this week we're in chapter 12. And this week it fell on a teaching of Jesus talking about worry. I think this is always relevant and always a message that we need to hear. Anybody here worry about things sometimes? Well, how about this? Does anybody here never worry? If I saw any hand, I was going to go sit down and have you come up and teach this. And it seems like sometimes things fall just right when preaching through a series or a book of scripture. I'd say this message is just as much for me as it is for all of you. Tomorrow I think you all know, I had a heart attack last April and have had some ongoing chest pains and problems. So tomorrow I go and get another stent or two to try to open up blockages. And while it seems to be routine enough, it's always a little bit, I don't know the word, creepy when they're getting up in your heart. So looking forward to it, and at the same time have some anxiety and worry going into that. But Jesus' words here, very comforting and very true. It's so easy to lose sight of it and to forget. We'll start at Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me judge or arbiter between you?" So a man speaks out as Jesus is teaching. It almost seems like an interruption in this passage. It says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now, Jesus, it seems, stops him right there and doesn't even get into the circumstances of what's going on. But with inheritances, it seems like there's often so many problems. Families where everybody seems to be getting along. Sometimes when there's an inheritance at stake, true colors comes out, the worst in people come out, and this man was having some kind of a dispute with his brother. We can only guess as to what's going on because the passage doesn't tell us. Was his brother the executor and had control of everything and wasn't dispersing it? Now, sometimes we see, I read advice columns and, the executor, one of many siblings, went and spent everything real fast or hid assets before it was spent. And once it's all gone, even a court order doesn't do much good once everything's all spent. Or if nobody can find where the assets are. So we don't know what happened. And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" It wasn't the proper time or the proper place. For these types of things, you go before a judge, not the local rabbi. So Jesus stated the obvious, "Who appointed me a judge or arbiter between you?" And then he uses this as a teaching opportunity. Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." There's a lot right there when he says, life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. That would make a good bumper sticker. You see the ones on cars, He who dies with the most toys wins. And then one seemed to follow that. He who dies with the most toys still dies. And Jesus' life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. The Bible tells us talks a lot about greed. Colossians 3, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. And I've heard a lot of messages, and sometimes I have a hard time with this, talking about idolatry. Idolatry being anything you put before God is an idol. Sometimes I think like most Americans without other cultural issues in our families don't have the temptation for idolatry. Don't have the temptation to commit idolatry proper. I don't know if I've ever been seriously tempted to go worship another deity, or to bow down before a statue, or to make an offering before one or another god. It's just not something that's been part of my life or my existence. Now, sometimes you get into other churches, Christian churches of other cultures, sometimes it's very real in a whole different sort of way. I served in two Chinese churches, and one thing that would come around every now and again is traditional Chinese funerals sometimes would have, as part of the ceremony, making an offering of food to the ancestors. And a lot of Christians would be very uncomfortable with this, thinking, do I show up and be a part of this and honor my family, or do I offend my family by staying out of it? That's a hard question. But here's one verse in the Bible that tells us something else that's idolatry, and that's greed. And Jesus said, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life doesn't consist in an abundance of possessions, reminding us that life's not about money, life's not about stuff, but for a lot of people it does become their focus. Verse 16, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, and he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. That's a good problem to have. When you live in an agrarian culture, having a lot of crops or having a lot of herds, a lot of livestock, that's like having a big 401k. Having a good year, that's like picking the right stocks and getting really, really lucky. And he says, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. You've heard this phrase before. This is where it comes from. Life is good. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. Almost like I have a lot of extra money. I'm going to go waste it on wine, women, and song. It sounds nice. This was the ancient version of the FIRE movement. Some of you are saying, what's the FIRE movement? It's financial independence, retire early. It's a movement that says, get your financial house in order while you're young. Pay off all your debt. make some good investments, and not have to worry about working any longer. Well, the Bible does tell us a lot about a lot of verses out there. Don't go into debt. The borrower is servant to the lender. And there's good advice in that. And the Bible has a lot of good financial advice. But that's not exactly what Jesus is talking about. The Bible does tell us to plan for the future and make good financial decisions. But this is about putting our trust and our faith in it. So this man, he's thinking, I don't have to work for many years now because I have so much grain. And then grain was as good as, if not better than, money. You can trade it, you could barter it. He doesn't have to worry any longer. How much is enough, though? John D. Rockefeller, richest man of his day, said, just a little bit more. And that's often what it turns into, but how much would you need to not have to worry anymore? You have a number in mind? Well, this man apparently had hit that mark. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. What does it mean to be rich toward God? The Bible tells us that our good works are stored up for us, if you will, in a heavenly bank account. And when we appear before God, that He's going to give us crowns for the things that we've done. To be rich toward God, be rich in love, be rich in good works. To be rich in God by how much faith we have in Him and how much trust we have in Him. Now, Jesus used this as a teaching opportunity. Again, we don't know the nature of what the problem was. We have all sorts of verses in Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that tells us about different inheritance types of scenarios and how they're to be divided. In like Numbers 27:8, say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relatives in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of law for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses. And there's a lot of different what ifs and different scenarios and how to divide it. But here, Jesus' kingdom was at hand and coming. And He uses that as a teaching opportunity to say, don't put your trust in wealth. It solves one set of problems, but there's still worry. Ask the richest person in the room, do they still have worry? Yes, ask the richest person in Lincoln or in Placer County. Does it solve all of your worries? No, it eliminates some problems, which is good. But then Jesus goes on to teach on worry, and it flows right out from this. Jesus said to His disciples, therefore, whenever you start a passage with therefore what? Therefore ties that teaching in with the teaching right before it. So whenever you see therefore in the Bible, ask yourself, therefore what? Therefore, coming right out of this teaching on inheritance and wealth, thinking that, life is good once you just need to eat, drink, and be merry. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. Do not worry about your life. That's a pretty big one. That's pretty much anything and everything, isn't it? Don't worry about your life, about what you will eat, or about your body. We all tend to worry about our bodies as we get older, don't we? As things don't work as good as they once did. Don't worry about your body or what you will wear. A lot of people say that I have nothing to wear, even if you have a closet full of clothes and a dresser without any room left in it. Nothing's changed here from the first century and from what Jesus says. He says, for life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Therefore, as well, ties back, remember last week's passage where Jesus said the hairs on your head are numbered and the Lord knows how many of them there are? Life is more than food, the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn. Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than the birds. The birds. Jesus is talking about the ravens. We're all familiar with ravens. They're everywhere. They don't sow or reap. That means they don't plant seeds. They don't harvest. They don't have any storeroom or barn. We could say now they don't have any money. They don't use the bank. And yet God feeds them. You could say this just about any animal. God made ecosystems where every animal there is taken care of. God gave the birds, God designed the earth, God created it with ecosystems. There are enough worms for the ravens. There are enough worms for every bird. There are enough bugs for them to eat. God provides for them. There's enough. They don't need to do any work, yet God feeds them. God designed the earth so that there would be enough food for them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds? We all learn about ecosystems in biology class and in science class about how God made the earth. And what happens when we destroy God's plan and ruin an ecosystem? When all the trees are cut down in an area and it's deforested, habitats are destroyed. When all the bugs die, for instance, and then the birds don't have enough food, and then the birds start to die, and you disrupt one part of the ecosystem, and everything starts to die because it's all interconnected. Or you introduce a new predator into an ecosystem, you bring a lizard from one part of the world, a bird, a bug, and you introduce it into a new ecosystem, and everything starts to go wrong. You kill all of the mosquitoes, and whatever eats them, the bats start to die because there's none of them to eat anymore, and then their predator dies and so forth. It's all a very intricate design that God put in place. And we've learned about that God cares for the bird and every other species. But Jesus reminds us, we're more important than the birds. God will provide for us. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life. And there's a footnote here in the text. And if you look down, there are a few ancient texts that say, who of you can add a little bit to your height? Who of you can make yourselves any taller? Well, you can't by worrying about it. Maybe you can by wearing platform shoes, but that's not really making yourself any taller. By worrying it, you can't add any time to your life. Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? So Jesus gives us an example of the birds. Do you not have enough faith that God will take care of you and God takes care of the ravens? God takes care of the birds? Jesus was talking about God knowing all the hairs on your head in the passage we did last week. And it was saying that God cares for the sparrows, that several of them sell for a penny. The pastor I grew up with, his name was Pastor Rich, he said, worry is the temptation, the lie that something other than God is in control. When we worry about something, we doubt God. We doubt that God's not on the throne anymore, that something else is controlling life. Something else is pulling all the levers. Something else is in charge other than God. I'm going to read that again. And maybe a time after that later in the sermon. Worry is the temptation, is the lie that something other than God is in control. I think that's very true. A lot of the things we worry about never even come to pass. And we can make ourselves sick, miserable, and anxious by dwelling on them. All the things that could go wrong. Sometimes our problems aren't all that big. Sometimes therapists like to say okay, you're telling me about all the things you're worried about. What's the worst that could happen? A lot of the time when you ask yourselves that question, sometimes it's not all that bad. Then Jesus talks about flowers. Consider how how wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Just like the ravens, they don't sow or reap. Wildflowers don't labor or spin. That's funny to think of a flower working. Laboring and spinning was a lot of work. Anybody here spin? I'm not talking about spin class at 24-hour fitness. They're talking about spinning yarn to make clothes. That's how you make clothes. Factories and machines do that for us, so that none of us have probably ever had to spin before. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. God clothes the flowers more beautiful than even King Solomon, that was richer than any king that had ever come before him. Boy, I'll bet he had a nice wardrobe. Spinning sounds like hard work. I think if I had to spin and make thread in order to make my clothes, it just sounds too hard, doesn't sound worth it. I'm thinking I'm gonna go hunting and I'm gonna wear the buckskin outfit like Daniel Boone or Davy Crockett. But no, it's not fashionable. They would like to spin and make nice clothes. If that's how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, yeah, they used grass and stuff to start fires and to cook. How much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. We see this a couple times as a command. Do you think of it as a command? Verse 22, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or your body, what you will wear. Do not worry. Again, so we see that in verse 22. Again in verse 29, do not worry about it. It's a command, so thus we all worry by breaking the command and worrying about things. Sometimes we sin by worrying. For the pagan world runs after such things, and your Father knows that you need them. Verse 31, this is the key verse here. But seek his kingdom, and all these things will be given to you as well. Traditionally rendered, King James, but seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. That's the key here. This is for the believer. These words are for the believer. The wicked, the ungodly, not so much, because their faith isn't in God. Maybe they need to worry about these things. But for the one that's seeking God first and foremost, then God's going to take care of the rest. You're in God's hands. All the things you worry about, they're in God's hands. God knows you. And we're reminded that God cares for the birds. God cares for the flowers. Wildflowers, they pop up in the middle of nowhere. They pop up with your cracks in the driveway. They're on the side of the road. In their great splendor. But seek first his kingdom, and all these things will be given to you as well. When we're seeking God first and living our life for him, he takes care of these things. Think of it, if you will, as a wheel. You ever have a wheel out of alignment? We pay, when we have a wheel put on your car, to have it balanced. They put little weights on there so it's balanced. If you have a wheel that's out of balance, it starts going like this when you're going down the road. Think of your life as a wheel. And in the center of your life, where you put first is God and his kingdom. And if you don't keep God at the center of your life, things start to get out of balance. Things start to go wrong. But when we seek his kingdom, seek first his kingdom, when God's in the center of our wheel, then things just tend to go a lot more right than when God's out here in the peripheral, then our wheel starts getting wobbly again. Jesus, that's the key to all of this. The key to not worrying, putting God at the center of your life. The key to not worrying, reminding yourself that God is on the throne and God is in control. When we worry, we doubt that God's in control. We think something else is. Something else is ruling the world. But everything is in God's hand. And for those that seek him, all these things are taken care of. That's not to say that things are always going to go your way, but that there's a bigger plan in place. We need to hear these words often. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or your body, what you will wear. Then he says it again. Do not worry about it, but seek first his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. That's the best advice for worry. Verse 32, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Now, the early church, they really did an interesting thing with that. Acts chapter 2, verse 42, talking about the early church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at many signs and wonders that were performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Beautiful, beautiful picture there of the first church. Now, subsequent churches didn't all have that model, but the Jerusalem church at first did and was relying on God to care for them. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out. What does that mean? Provide purses for yourself that would not wear out. I think some of the ladies would have a big smile if I said, go buy a really nice high-end purse so that it's not going to wear out and you can have it for life. Get one with a lifetime warranty. No, even a Coach purse might wear out or break. Provide for yourself purses that will not wear out. Now, wallets that won't wear out. Men don't have purses typically. What's Jesus talking about? A purse that will not wear out, or a wallet that won't wear out. Heavenly treasure. Being rich toward God. Storing up for ourselves treasure in heaven. A treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes or no moth destroys. Jesus is reminding us about possessions. Anything we have can be stolen, and no moth destroys. You ever have something you like in the closet that you take it out because you're excited to wear it, and there's a moth hole in it? It's horrible. But Jesus is saying there's a place where we could put our treasure that never fails. Banks fail. It might not seem like it because we have FDIC insurance that guarantees our deposit, but banks have failed before, and we're only insured up to a certain amount with that. Bank accounts get hacked, get stolen, credit card fraud. I mean, a place where it never fails, where no thief comes near, no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Where our treasure is, there our heart will also be. Where's our treasure? It's supposed to be with God. And I think this is just such a rich passage of scripture here. Starting off with an inheritance dispute where Jesus doesn't even hear it and goes on to use it as an object lesson. Our worry won't go away once we get to a place where it's just eat, drink, and be merry. It's not all about stuff. If it were, have you ever been to a hoarder's house before? You ever watch hoarders on TV? It's one of those shows that you just can't look away, but it's stressful. It's just stressful. It's just stressful to watch. And there's been a movement of minimalism, of how freeing it could be to let go of things, because pretty soon your possessions can end up owning you if you're not careful about it. You know, where you spend all your free time cleaning the garage and organizing those things. But Jesus reminds us that God's in control, that there's really nothing we could do to give ourselves a perfect life where we don't have to worry anymore, eat, drink, and be merry, but to realize that God's in control. To realize these commands and ask yourself, am I disobeying God by worrying? Yeah, sometimes we are. Do not worry about this life. Again, he says it, do not worry about it, but seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you as well. It's a good reminder this morning to keep God at the center. And when we keep God at the center, he looks after us, and things fall into place. And maybe, I think it's something often, not a once and done. We always have to pull God back into our center and reaffirm that he's there. Reaffirm that he's at the center, being first and foremost. Because it's hard. We don't always seek first the kingdom. The kingdom's always there, but we don't always seek it first. So let it be a reminder today. Pull God back to the center so that our wheel is balanced. And seek first his kingdom. And we're going to have a worship song and then announcements, and then we'll be done. But as we do, if the Lord's not been in the center of your life and you'd like him to be, or maybe he never has been, I just want to invite you to come up and pray with me as we have this closing song.